Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where the theme of today is out of left field. Yes, I have a whole row of stories for you, including the viewer question that I don't think anybody expected to be discussing. And some of them seem like a good idea, and some of them seem like a bad idea. Now, the first is actually a bunch of activity around Spider-Man, and that's because CinemaCon is going on right now, and yesterday, the new head of Sony Pictures, Tom Rothman, made a surprise announcement that Sony is going to do an animated Spider-Man film, which is going to take place outside of continuity, but will come out 1 year after the Spider-Man movie from Sony and Marvel that they're working on together. Now, the only good news about this animated movie is that Phil Lord and Chris Miller are going to be working on it. There was some buzz that they were working on a Spider-Man related project. Everybody hoped it was the 2017 live-action Spider-Man movie, but no, it's this weird animated offshoot. Now, perhaps they could have some fun with the character just like they're doing with Batman over at Warner Brothers. Although on that note, if I were Warner Brothers, I'd be upset because something that was special and distinct about my superhero, Batman, will now be shared with Spider-Man. So apparently whoever's writing the contracts over there needs to either do a better job or think more outside the box. I guess this is out of left field for Warner Brothers' legal team as well, being like, we never thought they'd apply the successful formula they've used for our characters to characters from another studio, like the exact same type of character. I mean, it's one thing to take your own special creative voice and apply it somewhere else, but the exact same formula, I think, is a surprise. And also to come out just 1 year after the new live-action Spider-Man reboot, I think is very odd. And the other thing that's very odd about all this is that I think we all felt that Spider-Man was back on track, or, on track really for the first time. I personally don't think Spider-Man's ever been particularly well realized on the silver screen. I think with both incarnations there were good and bad aspects. Never did I think it was a home run. And I think we all felt that with Kevin Feige finally on board, that things were really going to take shape the way they should. I mean, that's what everybody always says, right? They're like, if only the character rights would revert back to Marvel, all of these problems would go away because Marvel gets it right. But we might be entering a dark time for Marvel, or a dark-ish time for Marvel. I'm sure they'll still be making lots of money. But these choices seem weird. I wonder how fans will react to Marvel not doing perhaps as good a job of keeping Spider-Man on track as they had hoped. And then also, of course, the very mixed reviews that are coming out of for Avengers Age of Ultron. We discussed that on yesterday's episode. You guys have been tweeting me photos, but also your reactions to the film, and they're also mixed. Some of you love it, and some of you are disappointed. So I'm nervous to go and see it on Monday. I'm really curious to see which camp I'm going to fall into. But I think that if Spider-Man doesn't turn out well with Sony, I think that fans are going to be disappointed, not just in a third failed attempt to realize Spider-Man on the big screen, but because this time it will mean that Feige himself personally failed. Unless he only got Spider-Man for his Civil War story, for a Civil War film. He doesn't really care what Sony does with the character. But I think that would have a very negative impact on Feige's image as well, because that's kind of his whole thing, that he's a super fan himself, that he's faithful to the characters, and he wants to see them well realized himself. So we'll see. I'm curious how you feel about an animated Spider-Man movie. No other details were given out except it's set for 2018, and that Phil Lord and Chris Miller won't necessarily direct, but they are working on the outline. They're believe going to produce it. They're very heavily involved from a creative standpoint. Also, what do you think this means for the Batman Lego spin-off that's supposed to be very comedic and visit Batman throughout the years? Do you think this takes anything away from that film, since they're going to maybe apply it to Spider-Man? All right, so that's the first half of this first story, because there's a lot of news about Spider-Man. And the other is that we have a short list that's emerged, or leaked really, of the frontrunners for the role of Peter Parker. High school-aged Peter Parker. It's not Miles Morales, unfortunately. I still think that's a big mistake, but there are two names on this list that I feel have potential and could make me maybe be interested in seeing Peter Parker for the third time. It's a tough sell, no matter who they cast, but two actors here I think are pretty good. So who's on the list? Well, we've got our little photo here, and we have Nat Wolf from The Fault in Our Stars and the upcoming Paper Towns film. I think he is a horrible choice. I think he doesn't have a strong likability factor. John Green fans might feel differently than I do, but I feel that he doesn't have the the kindness that Peter Parker needs to have. I think that's very important to the character. I think this actor seems a little too snarky to me. Perhaps he'll be wonderful in another role, but I don't think he's a fit with Peter Parker. Then Asa Butterfield from Ender's Game. We've heard this name before. I think that Ender's Game was such a disappointment that audiences have somewhat, I think, rejected Asa Butterfield. So it sucks for him as a child actor. Maybe he can go away for a while and come back as an adult, but I think it's too soon for him to be attached to another big blockbuster like this. Then next, Timothee Chalamet. I think he's okay. I liked his work on Homeland. He also was in Interstellar as the child that Matthew McConaughey's character did not care about. But I think also his look doesn't seem sympathetic. I think he looks like the male Keira Knightley to some degree, and I don't think you want to go that way for Peter Parker. Again, not particularly likable at first glance. Now here are the two actors that I think are a great choice, and I'm surprised and impressed they're on Marvel's and Sony's shortlist. One is Tom Holland from The Impossible. If you have not seen The Impossible, you really should watch it. It's a Ewan McGregor, Naomi Watts movie about the tsunami that hit Asia. A devastating tsunami that wiped out tourist areas. But it's also directed by J.A. Bayona, Guillermo del Toro's protege, so to speak. Really talented director, fantastic director, and it's just a fantastic movie. And not only is it well directed and well acted by McGregor and Watts, but Tom Holland in the film is just remarkable to watch. Really a talented young actor. So that he would resurface here is impressive. Whoever is the casting director over at Marvel, I don't believe they have an in-house casting director, but someone over there must be keeping an eye on new emerging talent because they seem to have a knack for picking the right people. So fantastic if he was picked. Now, he's one of my choices. Now, the other is the last name on the list, and this is Liam James from, get this, The Way, Way Back. And that character had a very Peter Parker-esque vibe, I believe. So I think he'd also be very good in the role. So those would be my two choices, Tom Holland or Liam James. I believe Tom Holland is also British, so another Brit taking over an American superhero, but so far so good. So I think that those two actors could actually re-interest me in the idea of Peter Parker in high school. But I'm curious, what do you think of this list? Who would you be rooting for on it? If Kevin Feige was taking a poll among his employees or the people at Marvel Studios and he said, who do you like? Who would you cast your vote for? And do any of these actors have what it takes to maybe spark your interest again in the story of Peter Parker in high school? I still think it's not going with Miles Morales was a huge mistake, but as many of you have said, perhaps this will ultimately lead to the Miles Morales storyline. Also, some people feel he might pop up in the Netflix Marvel show, but I think Miles Morales deserves the big screen treatment. Although the Netflix shows are so popular and so well liked, they might be like a version of the Ultimate Universe, a live action version of the Ultimate Universe, where they become so good that they have a Secret Wars and they merge them all together in the movies eventually, like they're doing in the comics. All right, so that's the first massive story of the day. Again, totally out of left field. Like, what? What are you guys thinking? Maybe it'll work? All right, so the second story, get this. Disney is moving forward on another live-action fairy tale. They need an intervention. There are just so many of them. I didn't even cover the news they were doing Pinocchio because it's just getting ridiculous. It's like you're going to oversaturate the market, which I think the superhero market, by the way, is on the brink of doing itself. So they should really be careful with live-action fairy tales. But a very interesting player has entered the fray, and as you can see, because his picture is here, it's Vince Gilligan from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul fame. And he, of all people, wants to get in on this craze for live-action fairy tales, which I think is absolutely unbelievable. And if Vince Gilligan called me and said he wanted to do something, and he was enthusiastic about it, I would say yes, no matter what it was, because I'm such a big fan of his work on Breaking Bad, and Better Call Saul. I don't see how he's a fit with the material. He wants to adapt Jack and the Beanstalk, and he's just going to apparently call it Beanstalk. If he has if it's like Jack grown up, because that's the thing. My favorite thing about the live-action fairy tales is when they do something like a different viewpoint on the story, or they do kind of like a sequel or a prequel. I think that's much more interesting, and I think it allows you to be a little more darker and sophisticated than just a straight adaptation. Although Cinderella made so much money that I would try and go for straight adaptations as well. Or maybe adaptations that can be a little bit, more darker and sophisticated. That would be fine with me as well. Although I didn't see that so much at play with Cinderella. I felt, some people could, might disagree, but I felt that Cinderella, the live-action recent movie, didn't really add anything to the mix, which I felt, besides sumptuous visuals, that was stunning and amazing, and I think is a large part of the film's success. but I would love to see them add different elements. So if they could do like a sequel to Jack and the Beanstalk, like what happened to Jack when he got older, and he's like a Walter White or Better Call Saul, Saul Goodman kind of character, that would be fantastic. So I think it's interesting. I think Vince Gilligan, this is also something he wants to write it and potentially direct. And so I think that he wants to obviously move into the feature of the film area, and I think he wants to do so in a big way. And he probably, I got the chance to interview him when he was at San Diego Comic-Con for one of the seasons of Breaking Bad, and he talked about that, adult storytelling was taking place on the small screen. And I think he's totally right. And as a savvy businessman, I think he realizes there isn't a place for that kind of storytelling right now on the big screen in a successful way. And I think he wants big box office numbers, just like he ended his television career, or he recently, I don't think it's over obviously, but he had a big high point with high ratings and a lot of attention. So I think he wants to have a similar image in the movie business, and he can't do that with adult sophisticated storytelling that isn't genre-y. So he can't do that. So he's picked an area that he wants to move into where he feels that he can contribute. I would have picked comic books for him, quite frankly, or I would have called it Marvel Netflix, but I guess he wants to get out of the television area, out of the small screen. But Disney fairy tales, a very lucrative area, and a lot of fascinating, interesting, unexpected talent is signing on for these films. So, interesting indeed. I'm curious, what do you think of Vince Gilligan doing a Disney live-action fairy tale? I'll see it. Again, I'll see anything he does, but I'm curious how you feel about it. Now, the third story of the day, a lot of you tweeted me about this. It's kind of related to movies. I'm trying to cover basically anything in the comic book realm, not only because Think About the Ink is back on hiatus, but because these comic book properties, the movies are the engine, but it's spilling out everywhere. And I think that the same people who are enjoying the movies are enjoying these other properties. So we're going to discuss a new thing from Disney, and they're doing an animated version of their female characters specifically aimed at young girls. So here's the image of the new characters, and a lot of you had a little bit of a problem with this. You felt that these characters shouldn't be changed so drastically for female viewers. And so let me just first tell you what's going on here, and then I'll give you my reaction to it and why I actually think it's a really good idea. So these characters are going to debut in 2015 along with Mattel. They're working with Mattel. And they're going to start in 2015, and they're going to come out as dolls, and kind of like an American Girl doll or lots of different brands. Each doll will come with like a little story about the superhero or supervillain, although I wonder how they're going to refer to them. I guess they're heroic in this incarnation for Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy. But they're going to have a story about them, talk about, their strengths of, their personality, and give little stats on them, like they do for a lot of girls' toys. And try and, basically the idea is, who are you like? What doll are you like? And, who do you want to, ideally carry around with you everywhere you go and, dress up like for Halloween. So the dolls are going to come out first, and then in 2016 they're going to become even more aggressive, and they're going to have TV specials, made for videos, toys, apparel, books, and other product categories. Basically, a giant explosion of comic book merchandise and entertainment things aimed directly at young girls. Now, what is the problem some people have with this? Well, you don't feel, again, the characters should be changed, and girls should be allowed to discover the characters as they already are realized. And they do have a lot of female fans already. So where's the merchandise for those fans? So I'm going to approach this from two ways. First, I'm going to give you my initial reaction. I love it. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, I want every one of them. I think like there's the comic book fan in me, and then there's the, the girl fan in me. I like girly stuff too. And I think they look great. I think they're really well realized. I think they look like a lot of fun. They look very spunky. And I think they look really great. I think that it's really important especially for young girls, when they see characters, to want to be that character. And they all look like a lot of fun, like they have a lot of personality, they have great style, and I think that's a really important aspect. I think instantly you look at one and you go, who am I? Like you want to identify with one of them. So I think that's really cool. I actually don't know which one I would be. I can tell you I like all of them actually, except for Bumble Bee. And I think this points out, again, the lack of diversity in lineup for comic book characters, particularly female and male. I just think that Bumble Bee, she looks the least cool of the group, and that's unfortunate. And I think maybe they could. In Katana, the fact that they continue to push Katana and not Cassandra Cain, but I guess they already have Batgirl there. But still, and you can see obviously, I think that the Batgirl, the way they've revamped that character by having her in Burnside in the comic, is also a really big game changer. And I'm excited to see this eventually. I think you're seeing this here as part of that. And I'm excited to see it trickle into the TV and movie adaptations of these characters as well. You're seeing Marvel pick it up with the way Spider-Woman's being depicted. I think it's very, very exciting. The way that women are suddenly being depicted as people who aren't afraid of their girliness. So I think it's great. Really fantastic. And I think that women are only going to become an even stronger part of the comic book and genre audience because of moves like this. So personally, I love it. Now, from a business perspective, allow me to explain to you why these characters have to be repurposed. Now, there are fans already who like the female characters the way they are, but obviously they're not buying the merchandise. If they would buy the merchandise would exist, right? There's all these people complaining and saying, oh, the toy companies and the cartoon executives aren't appealing to the female audience. But the reason is because there's no female audience to appeal to. The bottom line, they have no agenda. The bottom line here is to make money. So, and I think because the Batgirl comic is selling so well, they're like, okay, we see a path where we can make money. So the reason you haven't seen it pursued in the past is because there's been no money to be made. They've tried to float out female action figures in the likeness of the comic book characters the way they are currently depicted. Hasn't worked. They've put the female characters on merchandise. Like a lot of people are saying, where's Black Widow on the merchandise? Where's Gamora on the merchandise? Well, clearly the few merchandise that they have made for these characters hasn't sold, so they aren't pushing it. So that's why they're doing this. They're like, okay, let's get them started early and get them to be fans of these characters. And then maybe they'll be like, well, what does Harley Quinn do in the comic? As I get older, I will then discover her and search her out and become more of a fan. So it's important to, you want to build these fans early on. And then just like I think it's really a shame there aren't more young adult comics, all ages comics out there. They're very important. That's why it's why there's a lack of animated series out there. That's also very important. Although Young Justice was fantastic and had a lot of great female characters, but didn't work out. They don't cancel. One day a Cartoon Network executive doesn't wake up and go, you know what? I'm tired of promoting DC. I don't care how popular Young Justice is. I want it canceled. They go, I can't sell any merchandise for it. It doesn't do that well in the ratings. I'm getting rid of it. So it's really, it's all business-driven decisions. So the likeness I want, the thing I want to draw your attention to is the Lego recently did something similar where they launched the Lego Friends line. And this was Legos aimed at girls. And they would have them build stuff like a mall or a beauty shop, and all the bricks are like pastel colors and white. And when I first saw it, I had a similar reaction that many of you had to this, where I was like, hey, when I was little, I played with Legos, and why can't girls just be part of the group? Why do they have to have their own special group of Legos? Well, I have to say, the Lego Friends line has not only become quite popular, but I recently went into a Lego store just to look around, and I liked a lot of the stuff they had for Lego Friends, just like I look at this. And I think, sometimes I have to say, girls have the best of everything because they can have like the fun stuff, and also, there's boys can buy these products as well, but you kind of get everything. You're like, oh, I can play with the stuff that's aimed at boys, and I can play with this stuff too. So I liked a lot of they had some really fun, like they had a mall, and I have to say, I like malls, so I was really impressed with the Lego toys that they built. The Lego Friends line. And if Lego Friends line is popular, and I saw girls in that section of the store looking at the toys and saying they wanted them, well then, at least they're playing with Legos. And that's the bottom line, right? You can try and prove a point and be like, no, you play with the regular Legos. But you can have a bunch of girls who don't play with the regular Legos. So they just don't play with Legos, and you've lost a customer and someone to the culture. So just get them in there any way that you can. And I think this is necessary to bring in that female demographic that isn't into the comics the way they're currently presented. So I think this is very smart of DC. And if it works out, expect Marvel to come in as well. Because I think that they're also working on, they have their Avengers A-Force comic that they're having come out. So you're probably maybe going to see them move in the same direction. I actually wrote a comic book that was like this called Heroes. The title was so horrible that it ruined the whole thing. But I have a tinge of annoyance because too soon, I guess, because the comic did the same kind of thing, having Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, was actually the lead character, and it was putting these girls in high school and trying to tell a very similar story to this and reimagining them in that way. So I love it. I obviously love it because I worked on something like that, and if only, again, too soon. It was too soon. All right, so those are the three stories of the day. Now, the viewer question is actually a story that a number of you asked me to comment on, and that is Robert Downey Jr. walking out of an interview for Avengers: Age of Ultron with a UK journalist. And this was a big story, and it got on all the websites. The Hollywood Reporter even put it on the front of their website, and I watched the video because so many of you asked me about it, although I didn't really want to watch the video, and I would actually caution you not to do so if you haven't seen it, because I'm going to tell you what happens right now. And the reason I tell you not to watch it has a lot of thumbs down, thankfully, on YouTube. But if a lot of people watch it, there's some chance that the people who did the interview will feel, hey, we got a lot of views and a lot of publicity, so it was a win for us. And you don't want to encourage that type of journalism. So basically, this was a pretty good outlet too, because, they weren't doing one of those round-robin interviews. Usually they'll do a press junket where Robert Downey Jr. sits in a room and the press is brought around to come and visit him, like I like to say, like going to see Santa Claus. So you go into the room, you ask your questions, and then you leave, and they just bring everybody in, and that way the actor can do tons of interviews in a single day very quickly. You get like 4 minutes. But this was specifically set up for this interviewer. So it must have been a pretty good outlet in the UK. So Robert Downey Jr., I'm sure some of you will say, how do you not know what the outlet is? But I'm telling you, I got in and I got out because I didn't want to give any attention to this type of journalism. So he was asking Robert Downey Jr. basically about his past with addiction and jail time. And Robert Downey Jr., to his credit, tried to just kind of brush these questions off and keep going with the interview. But this journalist clearly wanted some kind of soundbite about this, and he was pressing Robert Downey Jr. on the point. And that's where the journalist really made a mistake, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But anyway, the way the piece goes is Robert Downey Jr. just felt it was too much, and he just got up and left. And he said, and he was pretty polite about it. They show him leaving and him even turning around and offering an explanation and saying, it just got too Diane Sawyer-y for me, and leaving. So that, he didn't have to do that. And I think Robert Downey Jr. handled himself incredibly well. And we've talked a lot about actors, their pasts haunting them. And Robert Downey Jr. has been very open about his past, but I think he feels at a certain point he wants to leave it behind. I think he's earned that. I think he hasn't relapsed. And I think that's a big part of letting it go, and I think he's been very successful. And also he's done so many good things. He does stuff for charity. He really has taken it upon himself to rehabilitate not only his image, but his actual life. It's not surfacey. So here's where I think this went wrong. I think that the journalists, first of all, if they wanted to ask the question, they asked it, but when Robert Downey Jr. made it clear he didn't want to go down that path, it was the responsibility of the journalist to drop it. But because the journalist didn't drop it, they're really at fault there. That's the first mistake they made. I think you can't fault someone sometimes for trying. If they could work it way in there, maybe, hey, you want to look back at this? Do you want to throw back to where you came from? Fine, that's okay. You can float that maybe. It's really iffy, and you're risking your relationship with the studio, which, by the way, I think is probably completely torpedoed now after the way things actually went down. But I mean, if you're willing to risk your relationship with the studio, fine, ask the question. But once the actor says, I don't want to do this, and makes it very clear and gives you the courtesy of answering the question and willing to have you ask another one, well then, hey, take it, be thankful you survived, and keep going and ask another question. So pressing the point was the first mistake this journalist made. The second mistake was when Robert Downey Jr. made it super clear that he was so uncomfortable and going to leave, the journalist and the producer should have stepped in and said, hey, we're sorry, we shouldn't have pushed it, please stay, we're going to wipe the card, and we're not going to air what we just asked you. I don't know if that would have worked. I think Robert Downey Jr. probably still would have left, but at that point they could have at least salvaged the relationship with the studio for the show. I don't think I would ever sit down for an interview with that interviewee again. With that interviewer again, with that journalist. I don't think they ever would have sat down with that person, at least for a very long time, but at least the show would have been saved. But the producer's decision to not only keep going, not try to apologize to Robert Downey Jr. on camera, and then also to air the interview on YouTube, I just think is really incredibly unprofessional. It's like gotcha journalism. And I guess TMZ has perpetuated that, the popularity of TMZ, but I don't even think TMZ would do anything like that, because I think TMZ realizes that you have to have a relationship with these people, and I think there is somewhat of a, TMZ might be hated by the celebrities, but they understand that it's a necessary evil and it just feed their popularity and their success. You know, being in the tabloids and being, online and getting lots of coverage is an important factor when booking a gig and getting a coveted role. So I think, but TMZ, I think even this is crossing a line that I think even someplace like TMZ would not do. So it's incredibly unprofessional. I think Robert Downey Jr., though, and I think this ended up actually making him look quite good, because on the flip side, Robert Downey Jr. was incredibly professional. So that's my thoughts on it. I hope it's shed also some light on the whole press celebrity relationship and the studios. And so thank you everybody for asking me about it, and I hope you enjoyed my discussion of it. So thank you so much. That's today's morning movie news. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question, if you agree they were totally out of left field, and what you think of them now that you've wrapped your mind around them. And also let me know what you'd like to see covered tomorrow and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.